Dr. Kathleen Brender's gentle smile illuminated the dim hospital room as she leaned over 7-year-old Maya's bed. The pediatrician's practiced hands moved swiftly, checking the girl's vitals and jotting down notes on her clipboard. Maya's large brown eyes followed Kathleen's every move, a mixture of trust and fear evident in her gaze. "How are we feeling today, Maya?" Kathleen asked softly, her voice warm and reassuring. Before Maya could answer, a persistent buzzing emanated from Kathleen's pocket. She frowned, reaching for her phone. "I'm sorry, sweetie. I need to take this. I'll be right back." "Okay." Stepping into the sterile hallway, Kathleen answered the call. Dr. Brender speaking. The voice on the other end was grave. "Dr. Brender, this is Dr. Thompson from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about your father." Kathleen's heart plummeted. "What's happened?" As Dr. Thompson explained her father's sudden deterioration, Kathleen's mind raced through a slideshow of memories. Her father teaching her to ride a bike, cheering at her medical school graduation, his proud smile when she landed her position at the Children's Hospital. The stark contrast between those happy moments and the grim reality of his current condition left her reeling. Ending the call, Kathleen leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to compose herself before returning to Maya's room. She plastered on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sorry about that, Maya. Now, where were we?" As Kathleen completed her examination, Maya's parents entered the room. Their faces were etched with worry, mirroring Kathleen's own hidden concerns. "Dr. Brender," Maya's mother began hesitantly, "have you had any luck finding alternative treatments?" Kathleen's heart sank further. She had been researching experimental therapies for weeks, but the costs were astronomical. "I'm still looking into some options," she replied, trying to sound optimistic. "I promise I'm doing everything I can." After reassuring Maya and her parents, Kathleen retreated to her office. She sank in her chair, the weight of 2 lives pressing down on her shoulders. Opening her laptop, she dove back into her research on her father's condition, desperately seeking a solution she could afford. Hours passed in a blur of medical journals and clinical trial reports. The sky outside her window darkened, but Kathleen barely noticed. Her phone buzzed again, a reminder to call her father. "Hey, Dad," she said, forcing cheer into her voice. "How are you feeling?" Their conversation was brief, her father's voice weak and tired. Kathleen's facade crumbled as soon as she hung up. She opened her banking app, staring at the balance that seemed to mock her. It was nowhere near enough for the treatments her father and Maya needed. A knock at her door jolted her from her thoughts. Her boss, Dr. Jameson, entered with a sympathetic smile. "Kathleen, you should go home. You've been here for hours." She shook her head. "I can't. I need to find a way to fund these treatments. There has to be something we can do." Dr. Jameson sighed. "I wish I had better news, but the hospital's research budget is stretched thin as it is. We simply don't have the resources for experimental treatments right now." Kathleen nodded, defeated. "I understand. Thank you anyway." After Dr. Jameson left, Kathleen gathered her things and headed out. The cool night air did little to clear her troubled mind as she walked through the nearby park. The weight of her impossible situation pressed down on her, each step feeling heavier than the last. Back at the hospital, Kathleen made one last stop at Maya's room. The little girl was asleep, her chest rising and falling steadily. Kathleen adjusted her blanket, whispering a silent promise to find a way to help her. Exhausted beyond measure, Kathleen collapsed onto the small sofa in her office. She knew she should go home, but the thought of her empty apartment was too depressing. Here, at least she felt like she was doing something, even if that something was just being close to those who needed her. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through her office window, Kathleen's phone chimed with a new email notification. Bleary-eyed, she reached for the device, expecting another research update or hospital memo. Instead, the sender's name made her sit up straight, suddenly wide awake. The subject line read, "A proposition that could change everything." Kathleen's heart raced as she opened the email, her eyes widening with each line she read. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and read it again, certain she must be dreaming. The email contained a marriage proposal from an unknown billionaire, promising $1 billion in exchange for 1 year of marriage. Dr. Kathleen Brender sat at her desk, her eyes fixed on the computer screen before her. The email she had received just moments ago seemed to mock her with its audacity. She read it again, hoping that somehow the words would rearrange themselves into something less outrageous. Dear Dr. Brender, on behalf of Mr. Aloysius Kenzo, I am pleased to present you with a unique opportunity. Mr. Kenzo, a billionaire philanthropist, is offering you a marriage proposal with the following terms. 1 year of marriage, $1 billion upon completion of the term. Full confidentiality agreement. We await your prompt response. Sincerely, Victoria Blackwood, Executive Assistant to Aloysius Kenzo. Kathleen's mind raced. Was this some kind of sick joke? She quickly opened a new browser window and typed Aloysius Kenzo into the search bar. Within seconds, she was inundated with articles about the reclusive billionaire known for his eccentric behavior and vast fortune. As she scrolled through the search results, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. Dr. Brender speaking, she answered, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. Dr. Brender, this is Victoria Blackwood, came a crisp, professional voice. I trust you've received our email? Kathleen's grip on the phone tightened. Yes, I have. What is this about? Is this some kind of prank? I assure you, Dr. Brender, this is no prank, Victoria replied coolly. Mr. Kenzo is very serious about his offer. However, I must inform you that you are not the only candidate being considered. We require an answer within 48 hours. The call ended abruptly, leaving Kathleen stunned. She leaned back in her chair, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The absurdity of the situation was overwhelming, yet she couldn't shake the nagging voice in the back of her mind reminding her of her current predicament. As if on cue, her pager beeped. It was Maya's room number. Kathleen rushed down the hospital corridor, pushing thoughts of mysterious billionaires aside. She entered the young girl's room, forcing a smile onto her face. Hey there, Maya. How are you feeling today? She asked, checking the girl's vitals. Maya's pale face lit up at the sight of her favorite doctor. I'm okay, Dr. Cat. When can I go home? Kathleen's heart clenched. She knew the harsh reality. Without a medical breakthrough, Maya's chances were slim. We're working on it, sweetie. I promise I'm doing everything I can to make you better. After ensuring Maya was comfortable, Kathleen made her way to the ICU where her father lay. The sight of him, once so strong and vibrant, now frail and connected to various machines, brought tears to her eyes. Hi, Dad, she whispered, taking his hand. I'm here. I'm going to find a way to help you, I promise. The conversation with his doctors was tense. They spoke of experimental treatments, cutting-edge therapies, all carrying exorbitant price tags that were far beyond Kathleen's means. That night, as she tossed and turned in bed, Kathleen's thoughts kept returning to the email. $1 billion. It could save her father. It could fund research to help Maya and countless other children. But at what cost? Morning came, and with it, another email from Victoria Blackwood. The subject line read, Time is of the essence. Kathleen's finger hovered over the delete button, but she couldn't bring herself to press it. Instead, she found herself typing a response. Ms. Blackwood, I would like to meet with Mr. Kenzo to discuss this proposal further. Regards, Dr. Kathleen Brender. She hit send before she could change her mind. The day passed in a blur. Kathleen went through the motions at the hospital, her mind constantly drifting to the impending meeting. She checked on Maya, her heart heavy with the knowledge that time was running out for the little girl. As she was preparing to leave for the day, her phone chimed with a text message. Meeting confirmed. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., St. Jude's Hospital, private wing. VB. Kathleen's stomach lurched. This was really happening. The next day, she found herself standing in front of the mirror in the hospital bathroom, scrutinizing her appearance. She had opted for her most professional outfit, a stark contrast to her usual casual attire. As she made her way to the private wing, her mind raced with questions. What kind of man was Aloysius Kenzo? What could he possibly want from her? And most importantly, could she really go through with this? She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. With trembling hands, Kathleen reached for her phone and typed out a quick message to her best friend. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, call the police." With shaking hands, Kathleen pressed send, agreeing to meet Aloysius Kinzo to discuss the proposal. Kathleen's heart raced as she stood in front of the hospital bathroom mirror, adjusting her white coat and smoothing down her hair. She had faced countless medical emergencies, but nothing had prepared her for this bizarre encounter. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out into the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the sterile corridor. As she approached the private meeting room, Kathleen spotted Victoria Blackwood, Aloysius Kinzo's assistant, wheeling in a sophisticated, high-tech wheelchair. The sight made Kathleen's stomach churn with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Victoria nodded curtly at Kathleen before opening the door. "Dr. Brender, Mr. Kinzo is ready to see you now." Kathleen hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The room was dimly lit, with a large window overlooking the city skyline. In the center, seated in the wheelchair, was Aloysius Kinzo. His piercing blue eyes met hers, his face an impassive mask. "Dr. Brender," he said, his voice surprisingly warm. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Kathleen approached cautiously, her medical training kicking in as she assessed his condition. "Mr. Kinzo, I must admit, this is a highly unusual situation." Victoria stepped forward, her posture rigid. "Let's begin with the formalities, shall we? Mr. Kinzo has a proposal for you, Dr. Brender." For the next hour, Aloysius explained his condition and the reasons behind his unorthodox marriage proposal. Kathleen listened intently, her mind racing with questions and doubts. "I understand your skepticism, Dr. Brender," Aloysius said, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I assure you, my intentions are sincere. I'm looking for a partner who sees beyond my wealth, someone who understands the value of companionship." Kathleen leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Mr. Kinzo, with all due respect, this proposal is not just unusual, it's ethically questionable. How can you expect me to agree to such an arrangement?" A small smile played on Aloysius's lips. "Perhaps because you understand the importance of sacrifice for the greater good. After all, isn't that why you became a doctor?" Kathleen froze, her eyes widening. "How do you know about my reasons for becoming a doctor? I've never shared that with anyone outside my immediate family." Aloysius's smile grew wider. "I know many things about you, Kathleen. For instance, I know that you volunteer at the children's shelter every other Sunday. I know that you turned down a lucrative private practice to work in pediatric research." As he continued to list off intimate details of her life, Kathleen felt a chill run down her spine. Memories flashed through her mind, moments she thought were private, decisions she had made in solitude. "How is this possible?" she demanded, rising from her chair. "Have you been spying on me?" Victoria stepped forward, producing a tablet. "Mr. Kinzo has simply done his due diligence, Dr. Brender. He wanted to ensure that his potential partner was someone of integrity and compassion." Kathleen's mind reeled as she tried to process the information. "This is a violation of my privacy. I could report you for this." Aloysius remained calm, his eyes never leaving hers. "You could, but then you'd be turning down the opportunity to save not just your father, but countless other lives through your research." A tense silence filled the room as Kathleen grappled with the implications of his words. She thought of her father, lying in a hospital bed, his condition worsening by the day. She thought of Maya, the young girl whose life hung in the balance. "I need proof," Kathleen said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Proof of your wealth, your intentions, everything." Aloysius nodded to Victoria, who produced a stack of documents. "These are bank statements, investment portfolios, and a preliminary contract for our arrangement," he explained. "Take your time to review them." For the next half hour, Kathleen pored over the documents, her medical training allowing her to quickly absorb and analyze the information. The numbers were staggering. Aloysius Kinzo was indeed a man of immense wealth. As she reached the end of the contract, Kathleen looked up, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I need time to think about this," she said, standing up abruptly. Aloysius nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course, Dr. Brender. Take all the time you need." As Kathleen turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of Aloysius's reflection in the window. For a brief moment, She thought she saw a smile playing on his lips, but when she turned back, his face was as impassive as ever. Stepping out of the room, Kathleen felt as though she had just emerged from a surreal dream. The familiar sounds and smells of the hospital surrounded her, grounding her in reality once more. As she walked down the corridor, her mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired, Kathleen's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart sinking as she saw the caller ID. As Kathleen left the room, she received an urgent call. Her father had taken a sudden turn for the worse and needed expensive surgery immediately. Kathleen's heart raced as she sprinted through the hospital corridors, her white coat flapping behind her. The urgent call about her father's condition echoed in her mind, drowning out the familiar sounds of beeping monitors and squeaking gurney wheels. She burst into his room, breathless, to find a team of doctors surrounding his bed. Dr. Brender, the lead physician, greeted her grimly. "I'm afraid your father's condition has deteriorated rapidly. We need to perform an emergency surgery immediately." But he hesitated, his eyes conveying the unspoken issue. Kathleen understood instantly. The procedure was expensive, far beyond what she could afford. Her mind raced, weighing options that didn't exist. Then, like a lifeline in a storm, she remembered Aloysius Kinzo's offer. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and dialed Victoria Blackwood's number. "I accept," Kathleen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll marry Mr. Kinzo. Please, we need the funds now." Victoria's response was swift and efficient. Within minutes, documents were sent to Kathleen's email, requiring only her digital signature. As she scrawled her name on the tablet offered by a nurse, Kathleen felt as if she were signing away her life. But when the confirmation of fund transfer lit up her screen, relief washed over her. "Proceed with the surgery," she told the waiting doctors, her professional demeanor masking the turmoil within. Hours crawled by as Kathleen paced the waiting room, alternating between checking on Maya and staring at the hors d'oeuvres. When the surgeon finally emerged, his tired smile told her everything she needed to know. Her father would live. Exhausted but relieved, Kathleen made her way to the pediatric ward. Her team looked up as she entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. "I have some news," she began, unsure how to explain her sudden change in marital status and financial situation. "I've come into some funding that will allow us to pursue more aggressive treatment options for our patients, especially Maya." Her colleague's excitement was palpable, but Kathleen couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a deal with the devil. As she updated Maya's chart, her new reality began to sink in. She was now, for all intents and purposes, Mrs. Kinzo. That evening, a sleek black car arrived to take Kathleen to Aloysius's mansion. As they drove through ornate gates and up a winding driveway, Kathleen's apprehension grew. The house that loomed before her was more like a modern castle, all glass and steel, imposing in its grandeur. Victoria greeted her at the door, efficient as ever. "Mr. Kinzo is waiting for you in the main living room. Shall I give you a tour first?" Kathleen nodded, trying to take in her new surroundings. As Victoria led her through room after room, Kathleen couldn't help but notice the lack of personal touches. No family photos adorned the walls. No knickknacks or mementos gave hint to the personality of its owner. It felt more like a museum than a home. Finally, they reached the living room where Aloysius sat in his wheelchair, his face an unreadable mask. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kinzo," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. Dinner was a tense affair. Kathleen picked at her expertly prepared meal, trying to make small talk with a man who was now her husband in name only. Aloysius asked about her father's condition and Maya's treatment, his questions precise and knowledgeable. Yet, there was something off about his demeanor that Kathleen couldn't quite place. As the evening wore on, Kathleen found herself observing Aloysius when he thought she wasn't looking. Once, she could have sworn she saw his fingers twitch on the armrest of his wheelchair, a movement inconsistent with his supposed paralysis. That night, alone in her new bedroom, Kathleen pulled out her laptop and began researching Aloysius's medical condition. The more she read, the more questions arose. Something didn't add up, but she couldn't put her finger on what. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital visits and awkward interactions at the mansion. Kathleen checked on Maya and her father, relieved to see them both improving. But each time she returned to the mansion, the feeling of unease grew. It was during a routine visit to check on Aloysius that Kathleen noticed something that made her blood run cold. As she entered his study, she saw him quickly adjust his position, but not before she caught a glimpse of his toes moving beneath the blanket on his lap. Before she could process what she'd seen, Victoria appeared at her elbow. "Mrs. Kenzo, the lawyers are here to discuss the details of your marriage contract." Kathleen sat through the meeting in a daze, her mind reeling from what she'd witnessed. The lawyers droned on about clauses and conditions, but all she could think about was the impossible movement she'd seen. That evening, as Kathleen prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a new message. It was an invitation to a charity gala, her first public appearance as Mrs. Aloysius Kenzo. As she stared at the ornate invitation, another message popped up on her screen. This one made her blood run cold. "Not everything is as it seems. Be careful who you trust." Kathleen's heart raced as she stepped out of the limousine, her arm linked with Aloysius's. The flash of cameras momentarily blinded her, reminding her of the public spectacle their arrangement had become. Aloysius, seemingly unfazed, guided her towards the entrance of the grand ballroom where the charity gala was being held. As they entered, heads turned and whispers filled the air. Kathleen forced a smile, acutely aware of the curiosity in the eyes of the other guests. She felt like an imposter in her designer gown, playing a role she never auditioned for. "Mr. and Mrs. Kenzo, welcome." A portly man with a handlebar mustache approached them, his wife in tow. "We're so pleased you could join us tonight." Aloysius nodded politely. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. May I introduce my wife, Dr. Kathleen Kenzo?" The conversation that followed was a blur of pleasantries and small talk. Kathleen found herself answering questions about their whirlwind romance, each lie leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. She glanced at Aloysius, marveling at his ease in navigating these social waters. As dinner was announced, they made their way to their assigned table. Kathleen's attention was drawn to the stage as Aloysius was called up to give a speech. She watched, mesmerized, as he spoke passionately about the importance of medical research and the power of philanthropy. "It is our duty," Aloysius said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "to use our resources to better the lives of those less fortunate. Tonight, we have the opportunity to make a real difference." The crowd erupted in applause, and Kathleen found herself clapping along, momentarily forgetting the circumstances that brought her here. As Aloysius returned to their table, she saw him in a new light, wondering if perhaps there was more to this man than she had initially believed. Throughout dinner, Kathleen kept a watchful eye on Aloysius. She observed his interactions, his mannerisms, searching for any inconsistency in his demeanor. It was during the main course when she noticed it, a subtle movement beneath the tablecloth. Kathleen's breath caught in her throat as she realized Aloysius's toes were moving, ever so slightly, in his expensive leather shoes. The shock of this discovery nearly caused her to drop her champagne flute. She excused herself hastily, needing a moment to process what she had seen. As she made her way to a quiet corner of the ballroom, she was intercepted by Victoria. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Kenzo?" Victoria asked, her tone carrying a hint of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. Kathleen composed herself. "Yes, just needed some air. It's rather warm in here." Victoria nodded, but her gaze was piercing. "I hope you're finding the evening illuminating." There was something in Victoria's tone that made Kathleen pause. "What do you mean by that?" Victoria leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's just say that Mr. Kenzo's past is complex. There are things about him that would surprise even you, Doctor." Before Kathleen could press further, Victoria stepped back, her professional mask firmly in place once more. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mrs. Kenzo." As Victoria walked away, Kathleen's mind raced. What did she mean by Aloysius's complex past? What secrets was he hiding? The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, making the opulent ballroom feel suddenly claustrophobic. Returning to the table, Kathleen looked at Aloysius with new eyes. He turned to her, a questioning look on his face. "Is everything all right, my dear?" Kathleen forced a smile. "Yes, just a bit overwhelmed. It's been a long day." As the evening progressed, Kathleen found herself going through the motions, her mind preoccupied with the mystery surrounding her supposed husband. When the band struck up a waltz, Aloysius extended his hand. "Shall we dance?" On the dance floor, Kathleen felt uncomfortably close to Aloysius, his hand on her waist, the other clasping hers. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was in the arms of a stranger. "You seem distracted," Aloysius murmured, his lips close to her ear. "Is something troubling you?" Kathleen met his gaze, searching for any sign of deception. "I'm just tired," she lied. "Perhaps we could leave soon?" Aloysius nodded, concern etching his features. "Of course. Let me make our excuses." As they bid farewell to the other guests, Kathleen's mind was already racing ahead. She needed answers, and she was determined to find them. The ride back to the mansion was silent, the tension palpable. As soon as they arrived, Kathleen excused herself, claiming a headache. She retreated to her room, her sanctuary in this gilded cage. Closing the door behind her, Kathleen let out a long breath. She turned, ready to change out of her gown, when something on her bedside table caught her eye. An envelope, unmarked and mysterious, sat innocuously among her personal effects. With trembling hands, Kathleen picked up the envelope. She opened it, her heart pounding in her chest. As she pulled out the contents, her world tilted on its axis. There, in her hands, were old photographs of Aloysius, walking, running, living a life free from the constraints of paralysis. The truth she had suspected was now staring her in the face, captured in glossy prints from a past she knew nothing about. As Kathleen sank onto the bed, the photographs clutched to her chest, she realized that the game had changed. The question was no longer about why Aloysius had chosen her, but who Aloysius really was, and what he truly wanted. Kathleen's hands trembled as she examined the old photographs of Aloysius. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The man in the photos was unmistakably Aloysius, but he was standing, walking, even running. It contradicted everything he had told her about his condition. She took a deep breath and began a frantic search of her room, looking for any other hidden clues or documents. Her heart pounded as she ran her fingers along the edges of drawers and shelves, hoping to find something, anything that would explain this deception. As she reached the ornate escritoire in the corner of the room, her fingers caught on a small irregularity. With a soft click, a hidden compartment sprang open, revealing a stack of folders and papers. Kathleen's breath caught in her throat as she pulled them out. The documents were meticulous reports detailing her life over the years. Every major event, every minor detail was recorded with precision. Kathleen felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the extent of the surveillance she had been under. Memories flashed through her mind, moments from her past that she thought were private, intimate. There they were, documented without her knowledge or consent. Her first day of medical school, her father's birthday party 3 years ago, even her quiet walks in the park, all captured and analyzed. Anger and fear warred within her as she stormed out of her room, clutching the damning evidence. She found Victoria in Aloysius' study, calmly organizing papers. "What is the meaning of this?" Kathleen demanded, slamming the documents on the desk. Victoria's composure faltered for a moment before she regained her cool demeanor. "I see you found Mr. Kinzo's research." "Research? This is stalking. How long has this been going on? And don't you dare lie to me." Kathleen's voice shook with rage. Victoria sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Mr. Kinzo has been interested in you for a long time, Dr. Brender. He wanted to ensure you were the right person for his proposal. And what exactly is your role in all of this?" Kathleen pressed, her eyes narrowing. "I'm here to facilitate Mr. Kinzo's wishes," Victoria replied, her voice measured, "and to ensure that both parties fulfill their end of the agreement." Kathleen scoffed. "Agreement? This whole thing is based on lies and manipulation. I'm leaving, and I'm taking these documents with me. The world should know what kind of man Aloysius Kinzo really is." Victoria's hand shot out, grabbing Kathleen's wrist. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Dr. Brender. There are complications that would arise if you chose to leave now." "Are you threatening me?" Kathleen asked, her voice low and dangerous. "Not at all," Victoria replied smoothly, releasing Kathleen's wrist. "I'm simply informing you of the potential consequences of your actions. Mr. Kinzo has been very generous, but he also has the means to make things very difficult for you and those you care about." Kathleen felt the blood drain from her face. She thought of her father, of Maya, of all the patients who depended on her. Could she risk their well-being? Stepping back, Kathleen pulled out her phone and dialed her best friend's number. She needed advice, a voice of reason in this madness. "I need to go to the hospital," Kathleen said, her voice shaky. "I need to check on Maya and my father." Victoria nodded. "Of course. The car will be ready whenever you are." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Kathleen's mind raced, trying to process everything she had learned. As she walked through the familiar corridors, she felt a strange sense of disconnection, as if she were watching herself from afar. Maya was sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. Kathleen's father was awake, reading a book. He smiled when he saw her, but the smile faded as he noticed her troubled expression. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, concern etching his features. Kathleen shook her head, unable to voice her turmoil. She simply sat with him, holding his hand, drawing comfort from his presence. As night fell, Kathleen returned to the mansion. She observed Aloysius from afar, watching him interact with the staff, noting every movement, every gesture. Was any of it real? Or was it all part of an elaborate performance? Later that night, Kathleen found herself in a quiet conversation with Aloysius. She probed gently, trying to decipher his true intentions, looking for any crack in his facade. "Why me, Aloysius?" she asked softly. "Out of all the people in the world, why did you choose me for this arrangement?" Aloysius's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of genuine emotion. "Because you're extraordinary, Kathleen. Your compassion, your brilliance, your determination, they're rare qualities. I needed someone like you." Kathleen nodded, not entirely satisfied with the answer, but sensing that pushing further would be futile, at least for now. Back in her room, Kathleen sat at the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens. Her mind whirred with plans and possibilities. She needed to find out the truth, to understand the full extent of Aloysius's deception. But she also needed to protect herself and those she cared about. As the first light of dawn crept across the sky, Kathleen made her decision. She would confront Aloysius directly, demand the whole truth, no matter the consequences. With determination in her step, she left her room and headed towards Aloysius's quarters. As she pushed open the door to his bedroom, ready to demand answers, Kathleen froze in shock. There, standing by the window, perfectly capable of walking, was Aloysius. Kathleen's heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen in the doorway of Aloysius's bedroom. The man she had believed to be paralyzed for months was standing before her, perfectly capable of walking. The shock of the revelation hit her like a tidal wave, leaving her breathless and disoriented. How is this possible?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Aloysius turned to face her, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Kathleen, I can explain," he began, taking a step towards her. The movement snapped Kathleen out of her stupor, and anger quickly replaced her shock. "Explain? Explain how you've been lying to me this entire time? How you've manipulated me and my emotions?" Her voice rose with each question, the betrayal she felt evident in every word. Aloysius held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Please, let me tell you everything. It's not what you think." But Kathleen was beyond listening. Months of doubt, confusion, and suspicion culminated in this moment of clarity. She lunged forward, her hand connecting with Aloysius's cheek in a resounding slap. The sound echoed through the opulent bedroom, a physical manifestation of her fury. Aloysius didn't retaliate. He stood there, accepting her anger, which only served to infuriate Kathleen more. "Why?" she demanded. "Why go through all of this? What kind of sick game are you playing?" Taking a deep breath, Aloysius began to reveal the intricate web of deception he had woven. It was a test, Kathleen, an elaborate, admittedly misguided test to find someone genuine, someone who wasn't after my money or status. As he spoke, Kathleen's mind raced back through every interaction, every moment they had shared. The realization that it had all been carefully orchestrated made her feel sick to her stomach. A test, she spat. You toyed with my life, with my father's health, with Maya's future, all for a test. Aloysius's face contorted with remorse. I know it sounds terrible when you put it like that, but I had my reasons. I've been hurt before, used for my wealth. I needed to be sure. Kathleen couldn't bear to hear anymore. She turned on her heel, intent on leaving the mansion and never looking back. But as she reached the door, she found her path blocked by two burly security guards. "Let me go," she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Ms. Brender," one of the guards replied, his tone professional but unyielding. Panic started to set in as Kathleen realized the extent of her predicament. She was trapped in a house with a man who had effortlessly deceived her for months. Fight or flight instinct kicking in, she chose to fight. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Kathleen attempted to push past the guards. They were caught off guard by her sudden movement, but quickly recovered, grasping her arms to restrain her. "Let her go," Aloysius commanded from behind them. The guards immediately released Kathleen, but remained at the door, effectively blocking her exit. Kathleen whirled around to face Aloysius, her chest heaving with exertion and emotion. "You can't keep me here against my will," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. Aloysius's face softened. "I'm not trying to keep you prisoner, Kathleen. I just want a chance to explain everything. After that, if you still want to leave, I won't stop you." The sincerity in his voice gave Kathleen pause. Despite everything, a small part of her wanted to understand, to make sense of the madness that had become her life. "Fine," she conceded, her posture still tense. "Explain." Over the next hour, Aloysius laid bare the intricacies of his plan. He spoke of his past experiences with gold diggers and opportunists, of his loneliness and desperation to find someone who would love him for who he was, not what he had. As he talked, Kathleen's anger slowly gave way to a complex mixture of emotions. Disgust at the manipulation, pity for the broken man before her, and a grudging understanding of his motivations. But one question still burned in her mind. "My father," she said, interrupting Aloysius mid-sentence. "Was he part of this charade?" The hesitation in Aloysius's eyes told her everything she needed to know. Kathleen felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. She stumbled backwards, groping for something to steady herself. "I'm sorry, Kathleen," Aloysius said softly. "Your father was aware of the plan. He agreed to help because he believed it would ultimately be for your benefit." The revelation was the final straw. Kathleen felt something break inside her, a fundamental trust shattered beyond repair. Without a word, she turned and ran from the room, pushing past the surprise guards. She raced through the opulent hallways of the mansion, her vision blurred by tears. She burst out into the gardens, the cool night air hitting her face. She ran until her lungs burned, finally collapsing onto a stone bench, her body racked with sobs. As the initial wave of emotion subsided, Kathleen pulled out her phone with trembling hands. She dialed her father's number, praying that Aloysius had been lying about this one thing. "Katie," her father's voice came through, sleep-addled and confused. "What's wrong?" "Dad," Kathleen choked out. "Please tell me you weren't part of this. Tell me you didn't know about Aloysius's plan." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When her father finally spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I thought I was doing what was best for you." Kathleen ended the call without another word, feeling utterly alone and betrayed. She sat in the garden for what felt like hours, trying to process everything that had happened. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Kathleen made her way back to the mansion. She found Aloysius waiting for her in the living room, his face etched with concern and remorse. "Kathleen," he began, but she held up a hand to silence him. I don't want to hear it, she said, her voice hoarse from crying. I need time to think, to process all of this. Just leave me alone. As she turned to head up to her room, Aloysius called out, "What about Maya? The treatment?" Kathleen paused, her hand on the banister. The mention of Maya, the innocent child caught in the middle of this mess, brought a fresh wave of pain and confusion. "I don't know," she admitted, not turning to face him. "I just don't know anymore." As she climbed the stairs to her room, emotionally and physically exhausted, Kathleen's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Glancing at the screen, she saw it was from the hospital. With a sense of dread, she answered the call. As Kathleen contemplated her options, she received an urgent call from the hospital. Maya had taken a sudden and critical turn for the worse. Kathleen's heart raced as she sprinted through the hospital corridors, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The urgent call about Maya's sudden decline had jolted her from her contemplation of recent revelations. As she burst into Maya's room, the sight of the frail, 7-year-old girl connected to various machines sent a sharp pain through her chest. Dr. Ramirez, Maya's attending physician, pulled Kathleen aside. "Her condition has deteriorated rapidly," he explained, his voice low and grave. "We need to start the experimental treatment immediately," but he hesitated, his eyes conveying the unspoken issue. "The cost," Kathleen finished for him, her voice barely a whisper. She knew the treatment was astronomically expensive, far beyond what Maya's parents could afford. For a brief moment, she considered the irony of her situation, married to a billionaire, yet feeling utterly powerless. With trembling hands, Kathleen reached for her phone. She stared at Aloysius's number, her finger hovering over the call button. The weight of recent discoveries pressed down on her, but Maya's life hung in the balance. Swallowing her pride, she made the call. Aloysius answered on the first ring. "Kathleen, is everything all right?" She explained the situation rapidly, her voice cracking with emotion. "I know I have no right to ask after everything, but Maya needs—" "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Aloysius interrupted. "Tell the doctors to start whatever preparations they need. I'll cover all costs, no conditions attached." True to his word, Aloysius arrived at the hospital in record time. Kathleen watched as he efficiently handled the paperwork and financial arrangements, authorizing the immediate start of Maya's treatment. As the medical team sprang into action, Kathleen found herself torn between gratitude and suspicion. Maya's parents, teary-eyed and overwhelmed, thanked Aloysius profusely. Kathleen observed the interaction, noting the genuine concern in Aloysius's eyes. It didn't align with the manipulative mastermind she had come to see him as, and this contradiction gnawed at her. As they stood outside Maya's room, watching through the glass as the doctors began the treatment, Aloysius turned to Kathleen. "I know you have every reason to distrust me," he said softly, "but I hope you can see that my offer to help is genuine." Kathleen's mind flashed back to happier moments with Maya, reading stories, sharing laughs, and the little girl's unwavering optimism in the face of her illness. These memories steeled her resolve. Whatever her personal feelings towards Aloysius, Maya's life was what mattered now. "Thank you for doing this," Kathleen said, her voice a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "But it doesn't erase what you've done." Aloysius nodded solemnly. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness, Kathleen. I just want to make things right in whatever way I can." As the hours ticked by, Kathleen found herself in the uncomfortable position of relying on Aloysius's support. They sat together in the hospital cafeteria, the tension between them palpable. "Why did you do it?" Kathleen finally asked, breaking the silence. "The elaborate scheme, the lies, was it all just a game to you?" Aloysius's face contorted with a mix of shame and regret. "It started that way," he admitted. "A test to find someone who wouldn't be after my money. But as I learned more about you, watched you dedicate yourself to your patients, to Maya, it became something else. I fell in love with the idea of you, and I convinced myself that the end would justify the means." Kathleen absorbed his words, her emotions a turbulent sea. Part of her wanted to believe him, while another part screamed caution. As evening approached, Kathleen received a tentatively positive update on Maya's condition. The initial response to the treatment seemed promising, though it was too early to celebrate. This glimmer of hope provided a moment of respite from the emotional turmoil of the day. Exhausted, Kathleen returned to the mansion. As she packed her belongings, uncertainty plagued her. Could she trust Aloysius's apparent change of heart? Or was this another elaborate manipulation? Aloysius found her in the garden, staring pensively at the setting sun. "I have a proposition," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Not a contract or a deal, but a suggestion. Stay, but on your own terms. Total transparency from me, a renegotiation of our arrangement. We can use my resources to further your research, to help more children like Maya." Kathleen listened, her mind racing. The potential to save lives, to make a real difference was tempting, but could she separate that from the web of lies that had brought her here? As night fell, Kathleen made her decision. She sought out Aloysius in his study, her posture resolute. "I've made my choice," she announced, her voice steady. "I'll stay, but things will be different. No more lies, no more games. We do this my way, or not at all." Aloysius nodded, a mix of relief and determination on his face. "Agreed. Whatever terms you set, I'll abide by them." Kathleen took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. "Then let's rewrite this contract, and maybe, just maybe, we can salvage something good from this mess." As Kathleen laid out her conditions, a new chapter in their complicated relationship began to unfold, with the promise of transparency and the hope of redemption hanging in the balance. Kathleen took a deep breath as she entered Aloysius's study. The room, once a symbol of his deception, now felt different. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the space where they would redefine their relationship. "I'm glad you decided to stay," Aloysius said, his voice softer than usual. Kathleen nodded, her expression determined. "Let's be clear, Aloysius. If we're going to move forward, it has to be on new terms. Complete transparency, no more games." For the next hour, they negotiated. Kathleen insisted on maintaining her independence, while Aloysius agreed to provide unconditional support for her research. As they hammered out the details, Kathleen felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a way to salvage something meaningful from this mess. The following day, Kathleen stepped into Aloysius's state-of-the-art research laboratory for the first time. The equipment was beyond anything she had ever worked with before. Aloysius stood back, allowing her to take it all in. "This is incredible," Kathleen admitted, running her hand along a sleek gene sequencer. "It's all at your disposal," Aloysius said. "I meant what I said about supporting your work." Kathleen turned to face him, her eyes shining with excitement. "I have some ideas for a new approach to gene therapy. It's risky, but if it works, tell me everything," Aloysius encouraged, genuinely interested. For the next few hours, Kathleen outlined her innovative ideas. She explained how combining certain genetic markers could potentially revolutionize treatment for conditions like Maya's. Aloysius listened intently, asking insightful questions and offering suggestions. "This could change everything," he said when she finished. "Whatever resources you need, they're yours." Over the next few weeks, Kathleen and Aloysius fell into a routine. They spent long hours in the lab, working side by side. Despite her lingering mistrust, Kathleen couldn't deny Aloysius's brilliance and dedication. One afternoon, while taking a break, Kathleen visited Maya at the hospital. The little girl's condition had stabilized, but she was still far from healthy. "We're going to find a way to make you better," Kathleen promised, squeezing Maya's hand. Returning to the mansion, Kathleen found Aloysius in the garden. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the flowers, creating an unexpectedly peaceful atmosphere. "Can we talk?" Aloysius asked, gesturing to a nearby bench. They sat in silence for a moment before Aloysius spoke. "I owe you an explanation about why I did what I did." For the next hour, Aloysius opened up about his past. He spoke of his lonely childhood, his struggles with trust, and how he had built walls around himself to protect his heart. Kathleen listened, seeing him in a new light. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Aloysius concluded, "but I want you to understand that my feelings for you are real. They always have been." Kathleen nodded, processing his words. I appreciate your honesty. It doesn't erase what happened, but it helps. As they walked back to the house, Victoria approached them. Her usual confident demeanor seemed slightly shaken. There's something I need to tell you both, Victoria said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. In the study, Victoria revealed her true identity. She wasn't just Aloysius's assistant, but an agent hired to test Kathleen's integrity throughout the entire ordeal. I was tasked with observing your reactions, your choices, Victoria explained. Aloysius wanted to be sure you weren't after his money or influence. Kathleen sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new information. Part of her wanted to be angry, but another part understood the reasoning behind it. I hope you can forgive me, Victoria said softly. For what it's worth, you passed every test with flying colors. After Victoria left, Kathleen turned to Aloysius. No more secrets, she said firmly. No more secrets, he agreed. The next day in the lab, their work took an unexpected turn. As they were analyzing some test results, Kathleen noticed a pattern. Aloysius, look at this, she exclaimed, pointing to the screen. He leaned in, his eyes widening. Is that what I think it is? For the next few hours, they worked feverishly, confirming their findings. As the final results came in, they looked at each other in disbelief. We did it, Kathleen whispered. This could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. They celebrated with a spontaneous hug, both laughing with joy and relief. It was a moment of pure, unguarded happiness. The following day, they went to the hospital to begin the new treatment on Maya. As they watched the medical team administer the therapy, Kathleen felt a mix of hope and anxiety. It's going to work, Aloysius said, squeezing her hand reassuringly. That evening, they had dinner together in the mansion's dining room. The atmosphere was different, more relaxed and genuine than ever before. To new beginnings, Aloysius toasted, raising his glass. Kathleen smiled, clinking her glass against his. And to the truth. The next morning, Kathleen visited her father. It was time for reconciliation. As she entered his room, she saw the regret in his eyes. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, he said, his voice cracking. Kathleen sat beside him, taking his hand. I know, Dad. I understand why you did it. It's going to take time, but we'll get through this. As she left the hospital, Kathleen's phone rang. It was Maya's doctor. Her heart raced as she answered. Dr. Brender, the results are in, the doctor said, his voice excited. You need to see this. Kathleen rushed back to Maya's room, Aloysius meeting her there. As they looked at the latest test results, tears welled up in Kathleen's eyes. It's working, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. The treatment is actually working. They watched as Maya, who had been lethargic for months, sat up in bed, her eyes brighter than they had been in a long time. I feel better, Dr. Kathleen, Maya said, smiling weakly but genuinely. As they stood there, witnessing the first signs of Maya's recovery, Aloysius reached out and took Kathleen's hand. This time, for the first time, she didn't pull away. Years had passed since that fateful day when Kathleen Brender had first received the bizarre marriage proposal from Aloysius Kenzo. Now, as they stood hand in hand on the stage of the prestigious Medical Innovation Awards, it seemed like a lifetime ago. And the award for groundbreaking achievement in genetic therapy goes to Dr. Kathleen Brender Kenzo and Aloysius Kenzo. The announcer's voice boomed through the auditorium, met with thunderous applause. As Kathleen stepped forward to accept the award, her mind briefly flashed back to their wedding day. Not the arranged one, but the real one that had followed years later. She remembered the genuine joy in Aloysius's eyes as they exchanged vows, a far cry from the calculated gaze she had first encountered. Their moment on stage was interrupted by a familiar voice. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for them, said Maya, now a vibrant teenager, as she took the microphone. Dr. Brender Kenzo didn't just save my life. She and Mr. Kenzo changed the course of medical history. Kathleen felt Aloysius squeeze her hand, a gesture that spoke volumes about how far they'd come. Later that evening, back at their home, the once cold mansion now filled with warmth and laughter. Kathleen and Aloysius found themselves in the playroom, surrounded by toys and the joyful giggles of their twins, Hope and Justice. Daddy up, little Justice demanded, his arms stretched towards Aloysius. As you wish, my little judge, Aloysius chuckled, scooping up the boy and tossing him gently into the air. Kathleen watched, cradling hope in her arms, marveling at how naturally fatherhood had come to the once enigmatic billionaire. The following day brought them back to familiar grounds, the hospital where it had all begun. But now, the corridors gleamed with state-of-the-art equipment, and hopeful faces replaced the despair that once permeated the air. Dr. Brenda Kinzo, the new pediatric wing is ready for your inspection, a young doctor announced excitedly. As they toured the new facility, funded by their foundation, Kathleen couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. This was the realization of a dream she never knew she had. Their tour was interrupted by the arrival of Victoria Blackwood, once a mysterious assistant, now a dear friend and godmother to the twins. "There's my favorite power couple," Victoria greeted them warmly, hugging them both. "And how are my little mischief makers doing?" "Growing too fast," Kathleen laughed. "We can barely keep up." Later that week, Kathleen found herself standing at a podium, facing a room full of eager young medical students. "Your path may not always be clear," she began, her voice strong and inspiring. "But never lose sight of why you chose this profession. To heal, to help, to make a difference." As she spoke, she caught Aloysius's eye at the back of the room. He was there, as always, supporting her every step of the way. Meanwhile, Aloysius had thrown himself into managing their medical research foundation. Gone was the man obsessed with testing people's integrity. In his place stood a visionary determined to change lives. "We've got promising results from the trials in developing countries," his assistant reported. "The modified therapy is showing remarkable success rates." Aloysius nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "Let's push forward. We've only just begun." On a crisp autumn morning, Kathleen and Aloysius stood hand in hand before a simple headstone. The name etched on it was that of Kathleen's father. "I wish he could have seen all this," Kathleen said softly. Aloysius wrapped an arm around her shoulders. He knew. In the end, he knew what we could accomplish together. The day ended with a family gathering in the mansion's garden, once a manicured showpiece, now a lively space filled with children's laughter and the warm chatter of friends. As the sun began to set, Kathleen and Aloysius found a quiet moment alone on the porch swing. "I've been thinking," Kathleen began, her eyes sparkling with excitement, "about a new direction for our research. What if we could apply our therapy to neurodegenerative diseases?" Aloysius listened intently, his mind already racing with possibilities. "I think you might be onto something, my dear. Let's explore it." Their conversation was interrupted by the evening news playing in the background, headlines flashing across the screen. Brenner-Kinzo therapy approved worldwide. Millions of lives changed by genetic breakthrough. As darkness fell, they found themselves in a familiar spot, the balcony overlooking the city. Aloysius wrapped his arms around Kathleen from behind, both of them lost in thought. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Kathleen asked, leaning back into his embrace. "Every day," Aloysius replied, kissing her temple. "It reminds me how close I came to losing the best thing that ever happened to me." Their moment of reflection was cut short by the sound of small feet pattering down the hallway. "Mommy! Daddy!" Hope's voice called out. "Story time!" Exchanging amused glances, they headed back inside to their children. As they settled in for bedtime stories, Kathleen looked around at her family, Aloysius, Hope, and Justice, and felt a wave of contentment wash over her. While watching their children play, Kathleen whispered to Aloysius, "And to think it all started with an indecent proposal."